appreciate being here and the special place that Mastery Circle has held for all of these years, practicing much of what I'm going to be talking about this morning. I really honor your history of receptivity with one another, and the connection that that's clear that you all have. In my years of clinical work and academic counseling and life guiding and spiritual counseling, counseling people with special needs, and actually my first career out of college 30 some years ago as an investment advisor, I spent a lot of time listening, empathizing, really in an attempt to help guide and serve people in all sorts of life circumstances. And so I've tried to synthesize what I've learned, almost none of which I've learned in grad school in my training. And so I offer this to all of you. I often present to mental health professionals, and I know it's a mixed group here, and some of you are in the counseling fields, and I assume many are not. So what I'm going to do is sort of speak to deeper aspects of empathy and embodying a certain receptivity in being with anyone we want to be of support to. So first, there always needs to be a clear and mutual understanding of boundaries that allow for safety, especially in today's day and age. But it's so important as healers, as teachers, and I mean, any kind of professions really, as well as within friendships, that when an individual is trusting us with their vulnerabilities, that we are an absolutely safe haven. And by its very nature, true embodiment is grounded in knowing, understanding, and communicating healthy boundaries. Is that my beeping, or do we have everyone muted?
Shelley, that was someone else. That would be not you.
Okay. I mean, could we have it muted? Everyone muted?
Yes.
Okay. So, I mean, it's really critical because level of kindness and depth of interest and curiosity can really be misinterpreted as an opening on a personal level. And in general, people are not used to being cared for in their suffering, let alone having someone be deeply present to and with them. So, somebody can easily project something that's not there. And so eliminating ambiguity or confusion around the interaction is really key to creating a level of clarity and safety. So I'm going to talk about subtleties of observation, the way we listen, the way we mirror, the ways we inquire and empathize, in ways we can create optimal contact when supporting someone we're caring for. So the most important thing is that we have our own embodiment practice, a formal way in which we ground ourselves in feeling where we are before we ever attempt to be of support to someone else. And there are many ways to achieve it, and all of you practice many of them. And the wisdom traditions have taught centering practices for millennia. And particularly with meditation, it's, the largely universal exercise is breathing. And more specifically, focusing on the belly center as we breathe. When it's referred to in so many traditions, it's called the hara in Japanese, or the koth in the Sufi tradition. In Aikido, it's called one-pointedness, and it is a foundational practice to support the flow of ki, or qi in Chinese and qigong. And similarly, in the Christian contemplative tradition, it's what's referred to as centering prayer. And all of these deepen our embodiment and connection to being that is beyond our personality structures. And I think students often confuse the goal of some of these practices as withdrawing from reality in a way, just focusing on the breath or the belly. But in actuality, these exercises are meant to be a continual engagement with our experience, not at all a withdrawal from it. It's truly an activity of consciousness, of holding a space for ongoing transparency, of seeing clearly what we are feeling and needing as we work toward calm abiding. And it's being in touch with this in a depth way that enhances any shared experience that we have with someone else. So honoring however each of you drop into a deeper state of being, I invite you to take a moment and check in and discern while you're breathing, how easy is it for you to feel into your own body? I mean, since we're not in a physical space together, I'd just like to invite all of us to connect through the breath right now. Just a few gentle breaths. You know, all of life, whether we're virtual or not, is interconnected in that way. And I think it's helpful to recognize it. So as you're breathing in and breathing out, sense into anything you might be in touch with feeling right now, and just allow that. The body, and especially our face and eyes, exude who we are on and what our intentions are on so many levels. So we want to release as much as possible any personal judgments or tensions, you know, emotional chain reactions. So allow yourself to rest as you are without attaching to those feelings or thoughts, just being lightly aware of your own defenses or patterns that would get in the way of being empathic with someone else, like being withdrawn or agitated or tired or frightened or anxious. You know, when we can be aware of our own feelings and be in acceptance of them, at some level, it'll help us stay open to the other. And when they aren't seen, they will really block the potential of true receptivity. I mean, forget about being a hollow bamboo. It's impossible to offer that from a place of denial or suppression of our own stuff. So like in the martial art of Aikido, that really is truly is a spiritual practice. You know, least harm toward the other is the way we approach the opponent. And that's the goal. And it's so, you know, we're consciously aware of having gentle eyes and a relaxed jaw and tongue. A soft belly is an important piece, and relaxing of the shoulders and opening of the chest to help reveal more space in the heart center. And as much as possible, engaging compassionate intention to help heal the person we're with. So that's a great start to embodying a more peaceful state within ourselves. And now I'd just like you to imagine as I speak, being with someone with whom you want to be of support. And I think first we want to register an inner commitment, really, consciously, of an intention toward goodness, toward having faith in the healing that can occur through the connection and the other person's willingness to experience and express vulnerabilities. And as we hold that right intention, it's important to feel it, to actually feel what it's, you know, the sensation of a desire for wanting to care for someone else, to help be a healing source for someone else. And we're prayerfully holding this person who's in a state of suffering with as close to an unconditional positive regard as we can. So it really is counter to the very fact that we as a collective tend to perpetuate violence on the very places inside ourselves that need to be loved and cared for the most. So when we're wanting to help somebody who is hurting or in emotional turmoil, our work is to prepare ourselves to be the open-armed holding container for others' pain. So there are many subtleties to empathy beyond listening and sympathizing with difficult circumstances. You know, while we're listening carefully, we're also relating on an essential level. You know, sensing into that person's energy, the tone and timbre of their voice. You know, allowing our hearts to take it in, and we're allowing the alchemy of human vulnerability coupled with trusting receptivity as a path and potential for healing. And it's obviously a stark contrast to typical human engagement. I mean, normally our listening is largely transactional. You know, we're listening to respond, and it's a relatively unconscious structure. It's not necessarily negative. I experience most communication as friendly and somewhat polite, and that's usually efficient and overall practical. But in reality, it's somewhat removed. You know, a lot of listening in our work world is that way. In business, in the academic and scientific world, it can be done with an intention or mentoring of mentoring or teaching. It's constructive, it's productive, we learn, we certainly get things done. But again, it's sort of detached from the heart. And I bring this up because when we combine listening to mentor or guide with caring and truly receptive curiosity, and we include awareness of where we ourselves are, we infinitely expand the potential for connection, for growth, and totally optimized learning. So a complex process like this includes listening with whole body awareness, you know, not just with our ears. You know, we're actually tuning into shared neural circuitry, you know, the mirror neurons, by making eye contact, by observing somatic cues. I mean, the face itself is a roadmap to emotions. We tend to breathing patterns, notice the body's subtle tensions and tightenings when the body is relaxing and there's an opening, or when it's shutting down and there's an automatic defensiveness. You know, we're sensitively discerning when we can relate or interject. We also need to pay attention to cadence with speaking and volume, and especially tone of voice. And this is an aspect that is largely overlooked. And I don't mean just the tone of voice. I think everyone recognizes it, you know, anger or impatience in somebody's tone, but it's the congruence of the words being said and the tone of voice in which the message is actually being conveyed. That's critical to pay attention to. It's not something that's taught in psychology programs, and I believe it's one of the most direct routes to excavating patterns of suffering, actually. You know, especially because tone of voice and facial expressions change without trying or thinking about it. And you know, I just like in my couples work, you know, somebody will say to their partner, "Why do you always have to be so confrontational?" So like, you know, they're asking a question of the other, and it's like, you know, completely aggressive and accusational, or maybe some of us, or maybe not us, but somebody we know might say things like to our kids, I'm only doing this because I love you. It's like, I see smiles. Hopefully we can get the joke of how unconscious we can all be with our tone of voice and what we say. And there's such a depth of insight there. It illuminates the patterns of absence or defenses that have us wanting to run away. And I don't know, feeling and paying concentrated attention to those changes in affect, in rhythm, in vibration, in the subtleties that are actually causing those changes is really important. And through watching those, we can learn how and when to connect, and also where we may be unwittingly creating distance or resistance. We convey connection or not with our own posture. For instance, sitting creates a sense of warmth and caring much more than standing. The depth and softness of our eye gaze helps another feel seen, heard, and responded to without any words at all. And especially with trauma, which so often leads to being frozen in utter fear of relating too vulnerably, people who've experienced trauma can feel paralyzed or angry, withdrawn, exhibit lots of unhealthy, unconscious patterns. So we need to be embodied enough that we know these places inside ourselves, because as human beings, we have all experienced trauma, and to be able to separate out our pain if it comes up from the others, so that we're responding optimally rather than compounding the pain, or worse yet, causing us to project our own experience on the other and create withdrawal or suppressions. And when our bodies are inhabited, trapped actually in emotional energy, and it's not processed, it can manifest in so many unfortunate ways. It affects tissues and organs, causes physical pain, manifests in our tone of voice and our energetic bodies, and definitely diminishes our immune systems. Trauma and prolonged stress are healthy for us, our bodies, our hearts, and our relationships. And so true empathy heals by inviting those very vulnerabilities to be seen and cared for and worked with, and allows the patterns to loosen, to become less concretized and less arthritic. Does it make sense? Does it make sense to all of you? It's empathy supporting vulnerability. It grants us the strength to, and courage really, to tolerate and be with the suffering with some level of acceptance rather than blind rejection. There's a lot of scientific research around the healing quality of empathy alone. For example, clinical studies that prove through actual measurable biometrics in randomized clinical trials, patients showing improvement in recovery simply from enhanced empathic practices by doctors. Just simple personal questions, 3 personal questions instead of a normal way of operating. It elevates immunity biomarkers in blood tests. It increases and improves self-care. People report shorter duration of common colds, and also decreased, like reports of decreased chronic pain, all from just empathy, nothing else, no meds, no interventions, just empathy. So I guess I would I would ask you to ask yourself, how easy or difficult is it for you to be empathic, especially within yourselves? Like, looking at the emotions that you don't necessarily like in yourself. It really is a courageous thing to do. It's like something akin to a prayer. May I be as empathic as possible, especially with this feeling when I know I can be reactive or critical to my own inner world. It's so important to know these places in ourselves so they don't get confused with the other's pain. And in the psychology business, we call this counter transference. And it's just critically important to be aware of what's going on uh, inside. When you're really merging with someone and with someone else's experience, we may actually render a feeling inside us that is the actual discomfort in the other. It might be a tingling sensation or anxiety in the belly or tightening of the throat. And noticing this within us may be the very thing that is the impetus for more accurate inquiry into what is the other person's experience and how to be with it in a way that is beneficial, to really coexist with it, and sort of offering ourselves as a bridge to help dissipate the held, stuck energy with compassion and without judgment or being prone to interpreting too much. And instead by being with exactly what's there, the truth of it. And through that, it begins to morph. The suffering starts to change, to be less intense, more tolerable. And once the pain can be held in some deeper level of tolerance, of acceptance, of even in warmth, it becomes workable. And that is the doorway to healing. I also find a deeply profound moment can be just simply by thanking a person for sharing, just appreciating the courage to say what's true for them. And also verbalizing that no matter what, you're there for them. It sort of regulates the field of energy between you. And then the focus needs to be on inquiring into what is the quality or need that would be most helpful with this person's specific challenge. Like, if someone's afraid, how can we summon courage or safety? When someone feels hurt, what is the soothing? If there's anger, what's the source of peace? So while we are embodied as the anchor for sort of a safe space and security, we are simultaneously being a guide to help the other find clarity of awareness of the challenges and the unmet needs that are creating those challenges. And I think another thing that is something that I learned in grad school. I think the only thing as it relates to this is the difference between process and content. And it's a way to separate out more meaningful information from the superficial subject matter that we tend to focus on. Content is the intellectual, cognized, spoken narrative that someone presents, the storyline or the history of their lives, the accounts of their challenges, the everyday details that come up in life. And, we need to, we have to pay attention to that, especially as a therapist. You need to know the ongoing story. But what's far more important is being attentive to what's called process. And that is where we're understanding the overarching patterns, not what's being said, but how and why. and what are the underlying feelings and motivations. I hope this makes sense. And, that there's a clean distinction between these two. And so while we're listening to the story, we're really paying attention to the deep patterns that can cause us to be in a certain type of suffering versus passively listening to the content of life that doesn't really reveal much at all. So we're paying attention to what's not being verbalized, looking for repetitious constructions or covert agendas. We're observing the individual stressors or patterns of absence and avoidance. Content is like skimming the surface, and process is those habituated structures and patterns and tendencies that are largely subconscious for most of us. And many of those patterns are archetypal, like, you have, people who are projecting blame and always the victim, or, hold a general sense of entitlement or righteous judgmentalism, or the narrative is replete with sort of compensatory tendencies, so always wanting to impress with the stories they're telling, or avoiding conflict to always be the nice one. I'm kind of familiar with that one myself. Uh, so just, I think it's important to take a moment and notice what is your normal tendency, and really be honest with yourselves, and be able to own those shadow tendencies, which helps us be more embodied in who we are, in the truth of really who we are. So maybe you're the withdrawn analyst, or excessively validating, or anxious, or the knowing expert. There's so many ways that prevent us from really not being stably receptive to others. And the key is to be careful within yourself when you can see where you are not in this clarity of purpose and embodiment. And when we can do this, it requires, a bit of eating crow, but it really gives us the capacity to shift and come from a more humble place and a deeper heart space, rather than, grandiosely thinking we're completely together and we know. So along with content, which is obviously necessary to pay attention to, but much less important, is discerning the underlying psychology and its many workings and manipulations in the service of helping someone. It's also important to be aware of holes in the narrative, the incongruencies in values, or even deceptions, not to be critical at all, but to have a better understanding of what a person is lacking, and what they are ultimately needing, where they need help and support. And receptive listening needs to also be deeply investigative in this way. It's never a passive thing. And the key is to encourage exploring the truth, both to be of help, but also to support someone in being with exactly what's there, and with you as the safe container and the loving, or at least a kind witness. The totality and complexity of this kind of embodied receptivity becomes a basis to contemplate open-ended questions, that lead us gently toward truth-telling, to revealing something that has formerly been unseen or unknown, and often leads to insights and sometimes shocking revelations. We as a culture are not used to this kind of questioning, where we are allowing and even presuming a contemplative silence, like was talked about this morning, having an appreciation for the fact that these quiet moments allow for an inner depth that does not otherwise manifest. And it definitely requires a level of maturity. So, in this mode with someone else, we're asking with an openness and even hunger for diving into what is really being experienced. And we're consciously aspiring to being in utter curiosity of what quality would be most beneficial to cultivate right now. And how can I convey my heart in a way that will be felt? Is there a language that this person uses that I want to speak so that they can best understand? And with this kind of presence, we create potential for dynamic timing and feedback. And we're actually supporting the agency of the other to come forward. And when we're in this kind of flow, there's a mutually arising wisdom infused with loving intention and curiosity. And in that arises a fresh and truly dynamic experience. So, have you experienced moments like this? I really honor those of you who have. And for those of you who haven't, I'm hoping ascribing words to these moments may put you in touch with a desire to optimize this way of being with people you care about. And, in the exchange, we need to be appreciating the uniqueness and subtlety of the individual, the whole continuum of who they are, both good and bad, not just flattering them. We don't want to collude with people's egos. We want to help them see the truth of their humanness and their divinity, and help them be able to grow. And of course, we have to be very sensitive and tender when dealing with rigid and deeply held, especially distorted beliefs. And, looking at our society, there's certainly a lot of distortion out there, and more than I think any of us could have imagined. And that's where it's really important to have permission to explore these difficult places with another, because it's a delicate place to traverse, and clarity around purpose, purpose of the sharing in itself, and of any kind of feedback you give needs to be clearly welcomed. We also need to be on guard for openings for potential lightness, to potentially enter with humor or playfulness to ease the gravity of challenging situations. I refer to couples because I find the most humor in couples counseling. But it's sort of like, I found myself the other day saying to one individual in a couple, like, I get that you're frustrated, but do you really think dumping your anger like that is going to help get her to love you more? Like, people, it's just, one of those things where, let's lighten up here. We're all human. And can we laugh at ourselves? So, excuse me. So let me just take a drink here. I think the other thing is that we are intently waiting for the right moment to pause. Allowing that silence to be extended is so important. And it's in those moments that you also quickly learn how comfortable someone is with silence. I find it beneficial right up front to mention that it's desirable that if silence comes up, to try to find comfort with it, to allow that, so to reinforce the trust in being with it. It's good to get somebody's blessing, because obviously forced silence is awkward, but a cooperative one can be key to melting the boundaries of separated energies and moving into a more shared mutual embodiment of the moment. And when the outer and inner monologues recede enough for something completely new to arise in a shared pause, I consider that experience of silence to be a sacred moment. When we can deepen our own inner silence too, it serves both as a catalyst and ground for seeing into our own true nature. And when we aspire to share in that sacred ground with another and they join us, that's a moment of embodied truth. You know, much more than the conventional notion of knowing a person. We're actually peering into the intrinsic energetics and essential nature of who they are with tender curiosity. We're looking to the best of our ability at the inner world as it is in an unaltered way. And it's difficult to do with another if we're not embracing it within ourselves in the same sensitive way, to actually feel into the qualities, including our own challenges, of the inner experience beyond the mind. So I ask you to check in and sense how often you do this within yourself. It's so important to honor our inner seeing when we find something that isn't very flattering, because that gives us a chance to really make a leap. You know, we need to find the humility of seeing our own blind spots and realize that it's the good news. It's not a bad thing. We're continually and quietly doing that work within ourselves while we're also being with the other. And with the other, we're sensing into the state of being. You know, is it gentle or aggressive or flat or empty or vibrant and alive? You know, we're wondering what is the actual energy that we sense and feel from this individual. And then
Yes, Shelley, I just wanted to remind you, there's 9 more minutes in case you want to have interaction or feedback from people.
okay, I'll wrap up. So we're finding the thread of embodying our response to the qualities they're needing. I think in doing this kind of work, we also need to be generous in seeing the essential qualities of the person's heart that we can appreciate together, engaging in a prayerful pose of curiosity and appreciation, and allowing for a deep celebration of interconnectedness in self and other. So beyond the story and the anatomy and the energy, we're sensing into the intrinsic nature of who we are, of our souls, on a being to being level. And I hope I don't trigger anyone with the word soul, however you define it, or the essential life force that resonates with you. I think it's all pointing to that mystical and ineffable quality that defines who we are in our clearest and most unobscured being. And I feel that it's a place that deserves deep devotional tenderness. So like St. Francis or Jesus or Buddha or Hildegard, many of the great teachers have shown, I think it's the heart presence that is the guide to care for whatever suffering we're experiencing. And we as healers, as humans, can aspire to that for the rest of our lives. And if we do that, it is a graced inclination of heart. So may we, as much as possible, invite embodied receptivity into our lives and into the world around us. So thank you, everyone.